if you're drawn to the darkest corners of the justice system, if you want the stories they don't print in headlines, then subscribe now. Because tonight's case doesn't just end with a conviction. It begins with a number. And that number still echoes inside one of the most feared prison systems in America. The sirens cut through the desert night like a blade. Red and blue lights bounced off the razor wire fences of California State Prison, Corcoran, a fortress of concrete and steel buried in the dust of Central California. Inside its walls, men serving life sentences slept lightly, if they slept at all. Violence here wasn't rare. It was routine. But what happened on October 14th, 2011, was different. A correctional officer's voice cracked over the radio. Shots fired. Yard C inmate down. Within seconds, the yard was locked down. Floodlights snapped on. Armed guards took positions in the towers. Prisoners were ordered face down on the concrete. Some complied instantly. Others hesitated just long enough to feel the butt of a rifle slam into their ribs. At the center of Yard C, lying a widening pool of blood, was inmate Marcus Vale, 32 years old, serving 25, to life for armed robbery. 2 gunshot wounds to the chest, 1 to the neck, fired not from a tower, but from ground level. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Weapons didn't just appear inside Corcoran. Every inch of the yard was monitored, every movement tracked. For a firearm to surface here meant one thing: corruption, or something worse. And standing just 20 feet away when Marcus Vale collapsed was a man known only by a number. Inmate 726. His real name was Daniel Harker. By sunrise, the prison was sealed tighter than a vault. The FBI had been called in, not just because of the murder, but because of what it implied. A federal facility compromised. A weapon smuggled in. Possibly staff involvement. Special Agent Rebecca Morrow stepped onto the yard just after 6 a.m., her heels clicking against concrete still stained dark from dried blood. She had built her career dismantling gang networks inside federal prisons across the United States. She had seen stabbings, riots, coordinated hits ordered from behind bars. But this felt surgical. Daniel Harker, inmate 726, was already in solitary confinement when she requested to see him. His file was thick. 38 years old. Former financial analyst from Portland, Oregon. Convicted 5 years earlier for orchestrating a series of calculated kidnappings across 3 states. Victims held for ransom, never physically harmed, but psychologically terrorized. He had insisted at trial that he never intended for anyone to die. But one of his victims had suffered a fatal heart attack during captivity. The jury hadn't cared about intent. They gave him life. Agent Morrow studied his intake photograph. Clean cut, sharp jawline. Eyes that didn't look angry, just observant. Too observant. When she finally sat across from him in the interview room, a thick pane of reinforced glass between them, he didn't look rattled. He looked prepared. You were seen standing closest to Vale when he was shot. Morrow began. Harker tilted his head slightly. That's because he asked to speak with me. About what? A debt. Marcus Vale had gambling problems inside the prison. That much investigators confirmed quickly. He owed money to multiple prison gangs, money he didn't have. But Daniel Harker wasn't affiliated with any gang. In fact, he had spent most of his sentence isolated, reading law books, filing appeals, tutoring inmates for their GEDs. So why would Vale approach him? Did you owe him money? Morrow pressed. No, Harker replied calmly. He owed someone else, and he thought I could make it disappear. That was the first crack in the story, because when prison officials searched Vale's cell, they didn't find gambling slips or IOUs. They found coded notes, pages of them, all referencing a 726. And one phrase repeated over and over, the list. By mid-afternoon, the FBI had confiscated security footage. Cameras showed Vale approaching Harker on the yard. They spoke for less than 30 seconds. Then Vale turned, took 3 steps, and gunfire erupted from behind the weight benches. The shooter wasn't visible on camera, just the chaos. Inmates scattering, guards shouting. But here was the problem. Ballistics recovered 3 9mm casings. A weapon like that couldn't simply be assembled from scrap metal. It had to be smuggled in whole. Someone had brought a real firearm into one of the most secure prisons in the country, and the only man connected to the victim through written evidence was Inmate 726. By evening, Agent Morrow's team made another discovery. In the prison library, tucked inside a hollowed-out criminal procedure textbook, they found a flash drive, encrypted. When forensic analysts finally cracked it, what they uncovered shifted the investigation entirely. It wasn't gang communications. It was financial data, offshore accounts, shell corporations, wire transfers totaling over $8 million, all initiated after Daniel Harker had already been incarcerated. Money moving through networks connected to private security contractors, and one name that stood out among them, a retired deputy warden of Corcoran. Suddenly, this wasn't about prison gambling debts. It was about something bigger. When Agent Morrow returned to solitary to confront Harker with the discovery, he didn't look surprised. In fact, he almost looked relieved. "You found it faster than I expected," he said quietly. "Found what?" she demanded. "The reason Marcus Vale had to die." The air in the room felt heavy. "Start talking," Morrow said. Harker leaned closer to the glass. Marcus stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to see. The list isn't about debts. It's about inmates who know too much. Transfers, silencing, permanent solutions. Solutions ordered by who? Harker held her gaze. By the same people who made sure I got life. Morrow felt a chill crawl up her spine. "You're saying you were set up?" "I'm saying," he replied carefully, "that prison isn't punishment for me. It's containment." Outside, alarms suddenly blared again. Another fight had broken out in Yard B, but this time it wasn't random. Two inmates were screaming the same phrase guards had seen in Vale cell notes. 726 started it. Within hours, whispers spread through Corcoran like wildfire. Inmate 726 wasn't just a prisoner. He was either orchestrating something from behind bars, or he was the next name on the list. And as Agent Morrow prepared to dig deeper into the deputy warden's financial ties, a final report hit her desk. Security logs showed that on the night before the murder, Daniel Harker's cell door had opened for exactly 4 minutes. Unofficially, no guard signature, no camera footage, just a blank space in the system. But when they opened the sealed evidence locker tied to Harker's original kidnapping case, something that hadn't been touched in 5 years, they found a single new item inside, a photograph taken inside Corcoran of Marcus Vale, standing beside a man in a correctional officer's uniform, and scrawled across the back in black ink were 3 words: "He knows everything." And that was the moment Agent Rebecca Morrow realized Inmate 726 wasn't just a witness. He might be the architect of something far more dangerous than anyone inside those walls had imagined. The system within the system. By the time the sun rose over the razor-wire California State Prison, Corcoran, the prison wasn't just on lockdown. It was on edge. Rumors spread faster than contraband. Guards whispered in corridors. Inmates refused to leave their cells. Someone had posted a crude message in the shower block overnight, scratched deep in the tile with a sharpened toothbrush. 726 is lying. Agent Rebecca Morrow stood in the warden's office, staring at the photograph again. Marcus Vale, a correctional officer, taken inside a restricted hallway that inmates should never have accessed. The officer in the photo had been identified within minutes. Officer Grant Tully, 12 years on the job. Clean disciplinary record. Known for being strict but fair. He had called in sick the morning after the murder. Now he wasn't answering his phone. "Where is he?" Morrow asked. The acting warden swallowed. "We've dispatched officers to his residence." 20 minutes later, her phone buzzed. Tully's house in Hanford, California, was empty. Front door unlocked. Kitchen light on. Coffee still warm in the pot. And his service weapon missing. Morrow felt the investigation shift beneath her feet. The gun used to kill Vale was a 9mm, standard issue for correctional officers. But it wasn't just about the weapon anymore. It was about the money. Forensic accounting had traced more than $8 million through offshore accounts linked to shell corporations registered in Nevada and the Cayman Islands. The transfers were staggered over 4 years, small enough to avoid red flags, large enough to build something substantial. And a retired deputy warden whose name appeared in those transactions? Harold Beckett. Beckett had overseen inmate transfers across multiple facilities before retiring with honors 3 years earlier. He now worked as consultant for private prison contractors in Arizona and Texas. Morrow pulled up Beckett's public record. No scandals, no lawsuits, decorated career. But behind the polished resume was something else. Repeated inmate transfers under his authority, involving prisoners who later died in isolated incidents. Heart attacks, yard fights, unprovoked assaults. Each case closed quickly, each file thin. She returned to solitary to confront Daniel Harker. This time, he didn't sit. He paced. "You found Tully yet?" he asked before she spoke. "You're not in a position to ask questions," Morrow replied sharply. Harker gave a faint, humorless smile. "That's where you're wrong." She slid the photograph against the glass. "Explain this." Harker stopped pacing. "Marcus came to me 3 weeks ago," he said. He was scared. "Of what?" "Of being transferred. Inmates get transferred all the time. Not like this." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "He told me there was a pattern. Men who filed grievances about staff misconduct, men who complained about financial irregularities in commissary contracts, they'd get moved. And within months, they'd be dead." Morrow felt her pulse quicken. "Accidents?" she asked. "That's what the paperwork said." And what did Vale think? He thought someone inside was selling inmates. The word hung in the air. Selling. To who? She demanded. Private facilities. Contractors. Maybe worse. He didn't have proof, but he found a list. The list of what? Names. Scheduled transfers. Some with dates circled in red. "And your number was on it?" Harker didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached under his cot and slid something toward the glass slot, a folded sheet of paper. Morrow signaled the guard to retrieve it. Inside were handwritten names. 15 of them. Several were already deceased. 2 had been transferred in the last 6 months. And at the bottom, circled twice, "You expect me to believe you're a victim?" she asked. "I expect you to follow the money." Before she could press further, alarms erupted again. But this time, it wasn't in the yard. It was in solitary. Smoke began seeping under the cell doors. An inmate had set his mattress on fire at the far end of the block. Guards rushed in with extinguishers, dragging coughing prisoners into the corridor. In the chaos, one thing became immediately clear. Daniel Harker's cell was open. The lock had been electronically disengaged. And he was gone. The facility sealed instantly. Every gate shut. Every exit monitored. But Corcoran was a maze of blind spots, maintenance corridors, laundry routes, utility tunnels mapped decades ago and rarely inspected. Morrow sprinted through the corridors with tactical officers, her mind racing. If Harker was orchestrating this, the fire was a distraction. If he wasn't, then someone had just helped a life-sentenced inmate escape from solitary confinement. Minutes later, a shout echoed from the east stairwell. They found him there, not running, not hiding, standing over a body. Officer Grant Tully. A single gunshot wound to the temple, execution style. The missing service weapon lay beside him. Harker raised his hand slowly as armed guards flooded the stairwell. "I didn't shoot him," he said evenly, "but he came to kill me." Morrow pushed through the officers, eyes scanning the scene. There were no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds on Tully's hands. But there was something else. In Tully's breast pocket, partially burned but still legible, was a folded printout. Bank transfer confirmations, signed authorization codes, and at the bottom of the page, a transfer schedule for Daniel Harker. Destination, a private maximum security facility in rural Arizona. Date, tomorrow. Morrow's chest tightened. If Harker had been moved, he might have disappeared into the same shadow network that swallowed the others. But why kill Vale now? Why risk exposure? She looked up at Harker. "You knew this was happening," she said quietly. "I knew they were accelerating it," he replied. "Marcus confronted Tully yesterday. He threatened to go public. That's why he had to die. And Tully? Loose ends." Before she could respond, one of the forensic techs called out, "Agent Morrow, you need to see this." On Tully's wrist was a faint, nearly healed scar, a small symbol carved into the skin, 3 vertical lines. The same mark investigators had photographed on 2 other deceased inmates from past transfer cases. It wasn't random. It was branding. And as they rolled Tully's body over, another detail emerged. Clenched tightly in his left hand, a small piece of fabric, prison issued, not from Harker's uniform, from a guard's, which meant one devastating possibility. Officer Grant Tully hadn't acted alone. And somewhere inside Corcoran, someone else wearing a badge was still finishing what they started. As lockdown intensified and federal agents began questioning every staff member on duty, a final update came through from forensic accounting. The offshore accounts had just been emptied, every dollar gone, transferred within the last hour. Destination unknown. Morrow stared at the screen, realization dawning. Whoever was behind this knew they were closing in, and they were cleaning house. She turned back toward Daniel Harker as guards dragged him away in restraints. For the first time since this began, his composure cracked, just slightly. "You think this ends with me?" he said. Morrow didn't answer, because deep down she knew the truth. This wasn't about one inmate. It wasn't about one corrupt officer. It was about a system inside the system. And if they didn't expose it fast, more names would be crossed off the list unraveled. If you've been following Inmate 726, buckle up, because this chapter doesn't just reveal the truth. It burns everything you thought you knew about justice and corruption to the ground. By the time Daniel Harker was back in solitary, the prison had transformed into a powder keg. Every corridor hummed with tension. Guards eyed each other nervously. Inmates whispered rumors, some trembling, some eager. The name 726 wasn't just a number anymore. It was a warning. Agent Rebecca Morrow knew she had a narrow window. The offshore accounts were emptied. Tully was dead. And now, the only lead left was Daniel himself. But trusting him wasn't easy. He had been playing a dangerous game for years, and one misstep could get anyone killed, inside the prison or outside. Morrow sat in the observation room, laptop open, eyes scanning wire transfer patterns. There was a network spanning 3 states, dozens of shell corporations, contractors, and private security firms, all connected by names that appeared on the list. Some were guards. Some were former inmates. All were tied to unexplained deaths or sudden transfers. She called Harker's attorney, a sharp young woman named Lila Donahue, who had been skeptical at first but now sounded frantic. "Rebecca, if you don't move quickly, he's going to be transferred tomorrow. And once that happens, he disappears into the private system. You'll never see him again." Morrow had to act. She petitioned the federal court for an emergency injunction to halt Harker's transfer. Time was ticking. By 9 p.m., she had clearance, barely. Back inside Corcoran, Harker sat alone, flipping through the list. Each name had a note beside it. Date of death, facility, cause. Some were innocuous, heart attack or altercation. Others were more sinister, disappeared, found in storage. His finger traced down to bottom. His own number, circled in red with tomorrow's date. "You know what they're planning," Morrow said as she entered the cell. Guards flanked her, weapons holstered but ready. Harker looked up, calm as ever. "Yes, but you're too late to stop them. The network isn't just inside this prison. It's everywhere. Every private contractor. Every facility. They've been waiting for me to slip up." Morrow's jaw tightened. "Then help me expose it. Every name. Every connection. Right now." He hesitated, then nodded. Slowly, he revealed the full scope. Beckett had orchestrated a scheme to profit from inmates who knew too much. Tully and a few hand-picked guards had been his enforcers. They would eliminate anyone who threatened to leak information, through transfers, staged assaults, or disappearances. And the offshore accounts funneled millions from federal contracts and private prison operations straight into Beckett's personal network. This is massive, Morrow said. If we leak this, the FBI, the Department of Justice, everyone will want in. Harker's eyes darkened. And that's why most of them will die first. They had less than 12 hours to prevent his transfer. Morrow coordinated with the FBI, state police, and Corcoran's internal affairs. Surveillance footage was cross-referenced, access logs double-checked, and every exit route was monitored. Yet, despite these measures, Harker remained a ghost inside the system. He moved with an uncanny awareness, slipping from one blind spot to another. Then came the breakthrough. A maintenance worker tipped off authorities. A guard named Raul Sanchez had been acting suspiciously. Security footage showed him meeting with Tully the day before his death on his person. Investigators found documents linking him to the offshore accounts and a USB drive containing the same list Harker had in solitary. With Sanchez in custody, Morrow finally had her chain. Every name, every transaction, every death could be traced back to Beckett's network. It was the evidence needed to dismantle the operation. But Beckett wasn't in prison. He had vanished. No forwarding address, no recent sightings, no digital footprint after the last wire transfer. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. Harker, under escort for transfer due to the federal injunction, was being moved through the central corridor when a vehicle screeched to a stop outside. Beckett himself appeared, flanked by armed contractors. Private security guns loaded, faces obscured by masks. "Don't move, Harker," Beckett shouted, voice tight, controlled. "You're walking straight into oblivion." Harker smirked. "You underestimated me, Harold. You underestimated the system you think you control." Chaos erupted. Morrow's team responded instantly. A gunfight ensued in the narrow hallway. Shots ricocheted off concrete walls. Contractors fell, officers dove for cover. Harker, surprisingly agile despite being handcuffed temporarily, slipped into a side corridor, dragging one of the contractors with him. Beckett tried to flee through the prison's loading docks, but Morrow anticipated the route. She intercepted him, weapon drawn. Beckett froze, realizing he was trapped. "You're finished," Morrow said. "No, you have no idea what this really is." Beckett spat, struggling. "There are others, thousands who will continue the work. You think putting me in prison changes anything? You're going to answer for the lives you ruined," Morrow replied. "And this list ends with you." Beckett was arrested. The contractor surrendered. And finally, after months of terror, Harker was officially cleared from the imminent transfer. He remained incarcerated. A life sentence, yes, but now under federal protective custody. The list and Beckett's shadow network were exposed to the public for the first time, yet the ending was anything but peaceful. In the weeks that followed, investigations revealed dozens of missing inmates, suspicious deaths in private prisons across the country, and financial irregularities stretching back over a decade. The public was outraged, yet many questions remained unanswered. And then 3 months later, something happened that sent a shiver down Morrow's spine. A body was found in a rural private facility in Nevada. Same signature as the Corcoran killings. 3 vertical lines carved faintly into the wrist, a small note tucked into the uniform pocket. 726 watches. Harker, even behind bars, had survived the storm. But the system he had uncovered, it was far from over. The list had been revealed, yes, but the network had roots too deep, connections too widespread. Beckett was gone, but the ideology, the exploitation, the corruption, the silent murders inside prisons across the country, still pulsed quietly, waiting for its next move. Morrow stared at the evidence board one last time, the weight of the case settling into her chest. "We stopped one wave," she whispered, "but the tide is still rising." And somewhere inside Corcoran, behind reinforced doors and razor wire, the inmates whispered Daniel Harker's number with reverence and fear. 726. The man who saw too much, survived too long, and changed the rules of the system forever. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.